fermentings of this scare are really drawn out excellently. One Mason Wu is caught up in a local kerfuffle, and he's accused of planting people's names under the bridge which he was building, their names on paper. It was meant to be a curse of people, bad omen on that person whose name was written on that paper. This in the larger, even larger context of the lower Jiangsu region, the Yangtze Delta, being an area of coming and goings, people moving back and forth, an exploding population at the time in the Qing, brought about by the new imports of food from the New World, potatoes, corn, etc., meant that the population was growing. There was more food for everyone, and people were moving down to the lower Yangtze Delta region, as it's known as a region of fertile soil, lots of farming to do, lots of work. Much like people move to warm, sunny cities, and vagabonds go there just because they know that it's a place that's warm and safe to be. And with vagabonds come people like the Taoist monks and people practicing esoteric spiritual practices. They would move around with the itinerant populations. Here's an artist's impression of what one of these itinerant monks must have looked like. So you have these people, and I hadn't realised this. I'd always thought that the Chinese state provided money to these people, and in much the way that we have set up in England, the Church of England, I would have thought at this time religious services and monasteries were funded by the state. I was very wrong in this. Monasteries funded, for the large part, funded themselves at the time. Many monks and many monasteries could not afford to house so many people that were thrust upon them. Many people might leave their orphans, or people would go there just because they didn't have anything else to do. Maybe they weren't qualified for any work, or too sick to get, or too unlucky to get any. So these monasteries would have a large number of people who would call themselves monks, for whom they didn't actually have enough money to provide shelter and care for. So these monks would be walking around begging, and in many places, if they were not known locally, they would be seen as untrustworthy. They were the perfect target as the perpetrators of these hair-cutting scandals that was going on. And many of these unfortunate monks got caught up in this scandal, taken to the governor's yamans, the local governor magistrates, and punished severely for being suspected of these crimes. We have a situation too of low trust of this area. It was one of the areas of the largest rebelliousness towards the Manchu dynasty. And when the emperor hears stories of their tails being cut off, he may have interpreted it as a threat towards him. In fact, this is the very reason why I think it's reasonable to assume that people were so fearful of getting their hair cut off, with or without the sorceries, because it was punishable by death. It was a dangerous situation to be in. If you did not have a pigtail visibly, openly, in public, you may be in big trouble. So the emperor writes to the governors in this area, sort it out, catch these culprits. Now some governors react to this and drag their feet, which is understandable. Even at this time, 1768, this kind of thing was seen as ridiculous. Many governors saw this very cynically, and probably saw through the move of the emperor to stamp down his authority on proceedings. So some show trials were had, and some unfortunate innocents probably suffered from this. At the same time, many governors dragged their feet over responses to the emperor, giving excuses, saying that there was no such scare in their area as it spread around the country, and being careful to react to scares that the emperor did hear about. in as minimal way as possible. We even get to the level of detail from Kuhn of the written responses, the back and forth between the emperor and the governor, the sycophantic tone of the governors towards the emperor, saying, yes, yes, we'll do what we can about this terrible scare, and your majesty, let us tell you that we are just as horrified as he is about the cutting of the pigtails and what that might mean to the emperor. That kind of tone. Kuhn draws some interesting conclusions. The main one being that with this system, the governors actually were very good at ameliorating the worst of an autocratic leader. Now, the nature of these governors is key to note. The Manzu, remember, only top the whole system in terms of being the emperors, being the royal family. What they actually did was just take over the previous Ming Dynasty bureaucracy, mostly made up of Confucian trained civil servants who passed the Kurju exam and gained entry via the imperial entrance examination, and the exam system gave them their position rather than the Manzus themselves. So they were not reliant on the Manzu. Sure, they propped them up, but they had their own ways to get to the power that they had via the exam. The last name of the last chapter of this book was called 2 Cheers for the Bureaucracy. And in this chapter, Kuhn notes that because of this, the system was able to thwart the worst of a paranoid, tyrannical leader just because they had their own basis of their position. The hypothesis is that it could have been a whole lot worse without the system as it was. So you can rest assured tonight, sleep safe, dear Qing Dynasty citizen. The year is 1769 and the sorcery scare has ended thanks to the Confucian bureaucracy inherited by the Manzu dynasty.